The problem is like what happens between day 0 and day 95% complete, which sometimes it could be years.
From EE Tech Media and All About Circuits, this is Moore's Lobby. I'm your host, Daniel Bogdanoff. Hey, hold on just a second. Git pull Moore's Lobby episode 65.mp3. Okay, we're ready. If you've ever tried to design hardware with someone else or with a team, you know how painful it can be. Today in the lobby, we're talking about collaboration and revision control for hardware with a few folks whose goal is to make it easier with a Git-style platform designed specifically for hardware. We have 3 folks today, 2 of them from Allspice, co-founder and CEO Valentina Ratner and co-founder and CTO Kyle Dumont. And for something a little different, we also have Chrissy Meyer, a general partner at Root Ventures, the VC fund backing Allspice. We're going to explore hardware collaboration and hardware startup life. Thank all 3 of you for being here. Valentina, how did you know you wanted to be an engineer?
My dad worked in business and my mom is a computer engineer, so I had like a foot in both since growing up. The day that I realized I was going to be an engineer is when I did a program in high school and partnered with a bank CEO. I thought I was going to go into business, and I spent an entire day shadowing him and going to meetings and boards, and it was the most boring day I've ever had in my life. And I ended up sneaking out of my last meeting to go hang out with a maintenance team and learn how they were fixing ATM machines. And I was just fascinated, and I was trying to understand how do the machines know that if it's a $5 bill or a $10 bill, and like how they process it. And I was hearing all these noises and the clicking in the background, and I was like, how is it circling through things? And that was the best part of my day. And I went home that day and I realized that I was going to become an engineer.
I love that. Kyle, how about you?
Similar to Valentina, actually, my parents both ran their own company. My mom had a small accounting company. My dad was simultaneously an engineer, but also managed real estate. So there's a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. And in terms of the engineering side of things, I had always had a propensity for tearing things apart and seeing how they worked, like a lot of your listeners. I got into electrical engineering in college. And I wish I had more experience, in high school and in grade school. I'm very envious of the folks I talked to that are doing FIRST robotics and things like that. But unfortunately, no, I had to decide my major end of freshman year, of course, pushing it to the last minute. And I remember looking at the different engineering disciplines, and mechanical engineering, I had a bit of an understanding of physics and how things kind of came together. So I could kind of wrap my head around some of the concepts of mechanical engineering. Little did I know how little I knew. Software engineering, I also maybe a little experience using computers and in programming on the side as well. Electrical engineering, I had no idea how that worked. So for whatever reason, I decided that was the thing I was going to go study and try to figure out. And yeah, I did that for many years.
I love that. I don't know what it is. I'm going to jump in with both feet. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was the great black box of engineering that I just knew nothing about and had to just peel back the layers.
Awesome. And Chrissy, how did you get into engineering and tech, and then how did you transition into the world of VC? Because that sounds equally interesting and scary.
Yeah, the VC part was not intentional at all, which makes for a funny story. It's my background is also in electrical engineering, and similar to Valentina and Kyle, and actually a lot of overlap with other people who have been on your podcast. I came from a family of electrical engineers. I was building when I was 9 years old. Somebody gave me a DIY build your own radio kit from Radio Shack, and I was hooked ever since. So I came out to Stanford to study electrical engineering and get my master's out here, and went to work at Apple right out of school. Worked at Square, did some early stage startups, but never ever thought of VC or investing as a career path or something that I could do. I thought I would be in engineering forever because honestly, I just loved it. So when I was between startups, I met Avidan and Kane, who are my 2 partners at Root now, and they were great. But the truth is, I fell in love with their companies first. So I looked at the investments that they had made, and they were all these really amazing startups having huge impact in their own respective industries. So when they pitched me on joining, I was straight up with them. I was like, I have never taken a business class. I have never taken a finance class in my life. Are you sure you want me as an investor? And their response was very much like, well, we can teach you how to build a financial model. Like, that's the easy part. Like, finding and assessing technical risk, that's the hard part. And my response was like, oh, I've got that covered. Like, that's my jam. Like, that's what I'm good at. So here I am 6 years later.
So how did you all meet? How did the band get together?
Yeah, great question. So I came out of college and I did electrical engineering design for a number of years. I started off at iRobot, which is a relatively large company, doing a lot of consumer electronics design, so PCBs, sensors, interconnects for cabling and assembly and things like that. And ultimately left that company to join a 3D printing startup. Also to kind of, they're obviously a lot more hands-on in building up the team and setting up systems. But really in both experiences, I became pretty frustrated with how difficult it was to collaborate on our electronics designs, especially at the small startup when I thought, here's the opportunity for me to build a process from the ground up that can let us, be confident in our designs and changes, but simultaneously be flexible. And really found that there wasn't anything available. We were using GitHub, a lot of our other companies using GitHub, and there were a whole number of challenges with that for hardware that we'll get into. But ultimately decided that, I knew I wanted to build something in this area. I had experienced enough pains in the hardware space that I wanted to start a company. I had been, working on some ideas in this space and ultimately decided to go back and get an MS MBA. Fortunately, Harvard actually just launched this MS MBA dual degree program the same year I was, randomly out looking for graduate programs to try to learn a bit more of the business side and kind of get the wherewithal to start a company. I started at this MS MBA program, which is where I met Valentina. We were both in the same cohort starting out. Her background, she'll get into, is right in line with a lot of the stuff that I wanted to build. And obviously our skills and backgrounds complemented each other really, really well. And it became a no-brainer for us to kind of get together and start to explore the space, see where we could add value and build a company and build a new workflow.
So Valentina, what were you thinking of when you were brainstorming and looking for ideas to start a company? What were some things you definitely wanted to do and have, and things that you maybe didn't want to have, or things you wanted to avoid?
Yeah, great question. So I came back to grad school after working at Amazon, and my experience had been at the infrastructure project level, and I was working on multiple projects in multiple states. And as part of that, I kind of had experienced some of those pains and like, what is the state-of-the-art collaboration in hardware, which there's a lot of like post-it notes and pulling whiteboards and taking pictures and sending screenshots and things like that. And as part of that, I got involved with a team building internal productivity software. And that was a little bit of a glimpse into both the power that native software tools had for helping engineers do their jobs, and also how software is built and how that ecosystem has grown incredibly over the last several years. And I kept thinking, is like, wow, like look how great it is to put together software products and all of the infrastructure that you have and how you can build. And it's like, why are we still stuck in like what seems like very antiquated systems? And sometimes like not even that, it's like a lot of spreadsheets, right? So when I went back to grad school and I met Kyle and call it luck, but we, as part of this dual degree program, randomly assigned to work on our first project together and by one of our classes. So we were both very passionate about kind of the problems in the space, but hardware is pretty broad, right? And electronics is pretty wide, and there's a ton of issues. But what we keep coming back to is, I think at the end of the day, like both of us are engineers at our core, so like solving problems for the engineers first. There's been a lot of solutions that tackle like the financing problems, the procurement problems, the executive problems, which all of them have great merit and those are needed, right? But at the end of the day, what we wanted to build was something for the engineers first, where it's a developer tool that helps people putting together these amazing products make their day-to-day better. And what we keep coming back to is like, what can we learn from how software is built? And what can we learn from kind of the things that they've already figured out, right? Some of the problems are the same, and there's differences between the two, obviously, but also software has already like gone through and made some mistakes and figured out. It's like we don't have to repeat those, right? It's like, how can we pick up what they've already developed as a best practice and as a best way to address some of these problems. So we kept coming back to this idea of building a tool that helps engineers do their job, bringing those best principles from other places that are already proven embedded for them.
So it's almost meant to be. Chrissy, how'd you find the dynamic duo here?
Yeah, I don't even remember where the first introduction came from, but I remember meeting both Valentina and Kyle. They were still in school, like they were still at Harvard, and this is still very much a class project for them. And I can't remember what I was doing in Boston at the time, but I was out there and I remember sitting down in a coffee shop with both of them and them kind of just like talking me through the vision of what they wanted to build. And there was never like my response was just like so visceral. There was never a doubt in my mind that this problem that they were describing was very, very real, because the truth is I had lived it, like, you know, for 15 years at that point. And I was like, every single day or every single week, I had wasted so many hours, you know, wrangling with inefficient design reviews and mistakes in schematics and delayed product launches because of, you know, cascading mistakes. Like that had been so real to me. And I remember like feeling like our conversation was very much like, yes, Ian, you could do this. Yes, Ian, you could do that. And like, it was very kind of like free flowing and wide ranging. It was not a formal pitch. There was no deck. There was nothing like that. But by the end of the conversation, I just felt like we were completing each other's sentences. So I felt, you know, it was a fantastic first meeting. But then the complicating, you know, factor is that I had to take off my engineering hat for a quick second and say, okay, rein in the excitement. Like, yes, this is a fantastic product for an engineer. Is this a great investment? And you know, that's where I had to spend all of my time moving forward.
Well, it sure sounds like the experience was there to back it up, too. Valentina, you mentioned you were at Amazon. Were you doing hardware there?
So I was a PM in infrastructure for the e-commerce side of the house. So think of the physical building blocks that move packages to people's homes in. So I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and I was kind of helping put together those warehouses, robotics, machinery, conveyor belts, and things that move packages to people's homes. So different scale that we work at the product level right now. But I will say it's pretty consistent in terms of like the lack of tooling for the hardware space that comes from like what I call like a tool set to skill mismatch. Is like software engineers are great at building software and they can build software tools for themselves. Hardware engineers are great at building hardware. They're not often software engineers, and they're not as good at building software tools for themselves. So the kind of the quality of that ecosystem was pretty lagging behind. And through my kind of experience at the company and getting a little bit of exposure, that's the gap that I wanted to bridge, which is like, can we build incredible software tools for these engineers that are building physical products where this is not their expertise and there's no reason why it should be, right? It's like we want great hardware engineers building great hardware, but it's like, can we be that gap? And that's when I went back to grad school and did a dual degree and focused my MS in more the computer science side of the house.
Sounds like a really interesting problem trying to figure out like warehouse logistics at that scale. Coming from a mechanical engineering background and then a PM role, what has it been like diving into the world of double E? And was there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, great question. I will say to the outside eye, it's not that different, but diving in, it really is. I think like from a business perspective, if you told any investor or any like business person, it's like, well, I'm a mechanical, but not an electrical engineer. And like, it wouldn't really matter, right? It will be kind of the same. It's a technical role. You're building physical products, kind of lumping it together. But I think if you're going to go deep in our industry, like it really matters and it's different. And I think it took me about a year before I really felt, and when we were in school and doing customer interviews and conversations, it took me about a year before I felt comfortable with like that I know what I'm talking about. Even coming from a mechanical background, we be like one small step away from electronics. But some of the things that kind of made a difference is first, having a little bit of exposure. I actually worked at a semiconductor fab on an internship and wore the bunny suit for a summer and went into the lab and had some fun there. So kind of getting a little bit of experience exposure and also just talking to as many engineers and fully immersing myself and learning and coming in with a curious mind where I didn't know, and just trying to like absorb as much as possible. And it takes time. Kind of, it's funny that for some in some context I was an outsider, even though for most people I wouldn't have been an outsider. But now it's like that's what I do most of my day, and I love those conversations, and I feel like I've gotten to experience the problems and leave it through all of our customers and in interviews and conversations that we have every day.
Kyle, was there anything that you saw missing in the electronics industry where you thought, oh, this is just a shoe-in opportunity?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in fact, starting out, what we had to do is kind of rein in where were we going to address. The main issues that we ended up landing on were really around making it easy to build a workflow and collaboration process for electronics designs. So that was day one. In an area that we thought, again, software with tools like GitHub and GitLab and Bitbucket and the like had done a really good job of providing a framework to bring people together and let them kind of build their environments around, and then do things like, in software typically would be called a pull request or merge request, but is effectively, the same things that hardware engineers are doing with design reviews, just in the cloud, and directly either automating generation of diffs and changes and things like that, or even other output files as well. And then bringing those teams together, doing it all in the cloud. So that was definitely the area that we saw could be just huge value in this area, because we had found through our own experiences that the kind of, I guess you would say at this point, antiquated ways of doing hardware designs, which in our experience were largely, PDF exports or maybe even printouts in an in-person meeting that was scheduled 3 weeks out or whenever everyone's calendar was open. And then, going around the horn and making sure that we've got everything captured was just not going to scale when you started getting these pressures to release more often, to be more adaptable to design changes, whether they're external pressures or like we saw components going out of stock and things like that really kind of forced these teams to really be much more nimble in the way that we already knew we already had pressures for. But some of these things just really laid on over the last few years to really just, make these not nice to have, side projects, but actually like, mission critical things, systems that these teams need to resolve. So we wanted to go there. We knew from the get-go that we also wanted to do it in a way that was not going to kind of hold data in the way that the hardware ecosystem generally did. We wanted to kind of give users their data, their design information back to them. So from the get-go, you could always pull like a JSON format of your design data so that you can start to build automation around it. We always had a really strong API that users could use to connect their systems together, especially important for like enterprises and big companies that have these, existing and legacy systems that they have to connect together. We also wanted to enable, remote teams to come together. So that's really where we landed in our initial product.
I'm always curious to hear how these things came to be. Can you tell me about your initial vision and brainstorming for what Allspice was going to be and where you finally landed?
I remember definitely some basement sessions like back in grad school with, flowchart mapped out of the industry, probably 20 to 30 to 40 different blocks in the diagram of like, well, here's the electrical engineer, and then this is how they release the PLM services, and this is where firmware and contract manufacturers. And, that was where I mentioned early on, like we had to stay focused, like, okay, we need to jump in focus on electrical engineers. And that was definitely a point for us where we saw, A, they were very underserved market in terms of existing tools. B, that they were right in the middle of so many of these other disciplines, from operations to firmware to software to mechanical. There's just so many touch points. And then in terms of that whole kind of open infrastructure, when you start to look at all those tools and teams coming together, really like a platform was what we felt was needed there. So that kind of took us to the initial steps and brought us to Allspice Hub, which we launched a little over a year ago. And, really is that kind of collaboration platform for electrical engineers. And what brings us to today and the future is what I like to introduce as like the concept of CI, continuous integration, continuous deployment, which is, a fancy software term for automation, really.
Totally. When we were thinking about, we kind of mapped the workflow of an engineering, and where we kept thinking about and hearing, we spent hundreds of hours talking to engineers and companies big and small. And what we kept hearing was that this collaboration, this kind of communication layer, this kind of workflow management layer, which in terms of the tech stack comes between and your ECAD tool and your design tool and your PLM system. What we found was that kind of you do your design in CAD, and then you go through a process, which may be 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe 18 months. And when things are ready, or 95% complete, you put it into a PLM system. The problem is, like, what happens between day 0 and day 95% complete, which sometimes it could be years, right, that you're working. And that's where the teams they didn't really have a place to go. And all of that was living in people's desks and printed sheets and everything in between. So we kind of kept coming back of like, okay, this is where we're going to start to kind of like add the most value for these teams that we want to work with.
Yeah, I think anyone who's worked on hardware projects at scale has stories of sitting in a room with, a dozen or 20 or 5 other people trying to figure something out. And it's a universally difficult challenge. Chrissy, when you see an idea like this, how do you evaluate whether it's worth investing or not beyond trusting your gut?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, like as an engineer, I was 100% bought in from day one. I'm like, yes, I want this. Yes, I worked with teams that were using GitHub. That GitHub like is just being used as a dumb document repository because it doesn't have no understanding of what the files actually are and what the components actually do. So it just resonated so much. But then as an investor, like I had to take a step back and say, like, wait a second, it's a cool product, but can they build a big business around this? And can they turn this into a multi-billion-dollar business? Because that's what we need in order to return dollars, like for the way that our fund is modeled out, in order to return dollars to our investors. So it's what does the path look like to them building a multi-billion-dollar business, and what are the risks along that path? So I think the questions that I had in the early days, and still are questions that we debate today, to be honest with you, but it's like questions around like, is the market big enough? Like the truth is there are far fewer electrical engineers than there are software developers. So can you build a big enough business around this? How do you monetize it? How do you price it? What does pricing look like? Is the like bottoms up sales motion that they're starting out with eventually going to lead to big enterprise contracts? Like, can they bridge that gap? There's a bunch of big players in the space that are making the design tools. There's Cadence and Altium, et cetera. Like, are they going to build this? Or does this tool need to be agnostic to design tools? And then there's also just, I mean, you guys are well aware, but like EEs are a pretty traditional bunch, and there's a lot of skepticism, healthy skepticism in the community. What, is there going to be a general resistance to using new tools and adopting new tools, or is it something that people are easily going to adopt? So like, these are all the kind of core questions as an investor that I had. And the truth is, like, Valentina and Kyle had really thoughtful answers to all of those questions. And the truth is, any investment that we do, there's never going to be zero risk. Like, there's always going to be risk. So I think the question is, like, over time, and as we debate and discuss and brainstorm around all of these questions, fundamentally, do I become comfortable with the risks? And over time, I did.
Well, I know I have some more questions, but it's time for a quick break. We'll be right back. May 22nd marked the 50th anniversary of Ethernet technology. This also happens to be the month that we here at Moore's Lobby celebrate the 20th anniversary of All About Circuits. As a digital-only site, All About Circuits was made possible in part by the proliferation of the web, which has been made possible by Ethernet. All About Circuits began in 2003 with the digital publication of the textbook Lessons in Electronic Circuits, and the creation of the forum where electrical engineers and students from around the globe could ask questions, provide answers, share stories, and so much more. It is this combination of free, quality engineering resources and a vibrant community of double E's that allows All About Circuits to continue to impact the electrical engineering world after 2 decades. If you would like to help us celebrate the 20th anniversary of All About Circuits, head on over to allaboutcircuits.com and post your stories in the forum or in the comments section of this week's 20th anniversary interview article with All About Circuits founder Rob Pengeli. We would love to hear from you, and happy 20th anniversary to All About Circuits. Valentina, I'm curious how you went from shadowing someone and then sneaking out of a business meeting because it was boring to I should go to business school and become a CEO of a tech company. Can you walk me through that?
I've always been interested in both. And I think that what I found out was that I'm interested in where those two worlds intersect. I think what I realized is that I liked business, but I wasn't interested in every type of business. There's finance, there's healthcare, there is services, there is banking, right? There's different varieties of types of different flavors of business. The flavor that I like was the highly technical, highly innovative, engineering-backed type of business. And that came from a passion for like the science side, which is like I didn't want to build a service company. I didn't want to build a finance company, or I wanted to build a tech-enabled company and in an industry that I really care about, that it's the hardware space, which is who I am, who my friends are, who my community is. This is like my people, and this is the where it makes sense is for me, like where these two worlds intersect.
To add to that for a second, like the fun thing about watching Valentina operate is that like she's clearly very deep and can, operate on the engineering side. But as she stepped up into the CEO role, more than most other CEOs I see, she like really has embraced the like sales side of the business. And she had never closed a sale in her life. She didn't know anything about sales. She had never actually done it and as part of her job. Yet she like read every book, talked to all the right people, was studying up and practicing the sales motion over and over again until she like hit on something that worked. And even to date, like she has closed every single one of their enterprise clients. And it's just been really impressive to see her like dive in and like take that by the horns and really execute well.
Yeah,
awesome.
That's been the most interesting transformation, kind of going from the from engineer to CEO. And as Chrissy was saying, is like kind of what Kyle did with kind of jumping into, this is the area that I know the least about, so this is the most important one for me to go dive head first and figure it out. And it was very awkward at the beginning. I don't know how we closed our first sale. Like I had to like write a script and force myself to read it because I had no idea what I was doing. And you can't really learn it from a book necessarily. You can get some tips, but you got to go practice this. And the first time was super awkward. And the first time I got rejected was also super awkward. But it's been quite the ride. And now I've kind of taking it as it's almost like a game, and I really enjoyed it. And now it's like I wake up and like think about like our pipeline and our customers and figure out like when thinking about building a business is there's kind of three things. Like you have the product market fit, when it's like it's a product that the users need. You also have go to market fit, right? It's like, is this the best way to get this product into the hands of our users? Is this the best way to explain the value? Is this the best way for them to adopt it? And then like the business model fit, right? Like when Chrissy talked about pricing and like, should we charge per user? Should we charge per repo? Should we charge per component? And like, we have all these questions, and we're kind of going through that journey, both as a company and also as individuals and founders ourselves, where it's like, we're going through the same process of like getting founder market fit on the product, on the go-to-market and everything else. So I feel like, when we talk, is like we think about both, like what are the features a product need and what are the features our company needs to get to the next level, and what are the features that we as founders need, what are the tools and the experiences that we need to get to the next stage.
Kyle, I know like when I was in engineering school, you kind of are given the impression, if not told so explicitly, that going to the business side and sales side is like the evil sellout direction. But I've found it very fun. I'm curious how what that path looked like for you.
Yeah, there's a couple of areas I think of. One is in always in engineering, I always wanted to know enough about business to help make sure I was building the right thing. And I think that's the kind of the important business hat that every engineer needs to put on. Am I spending my time in a place that's going to add value? Because ultimately, like that's generally where I certainly get the most kind of like positive energy out of. And for us being an engineering first organization, having that background, what brings us kind of the most energy is talking with customers who are, or having customers walk us through their engineering workflows and just show us like this whole async design process where they've grabbed components and they left a comment and feedback that's saying like, hey, this thing needs to be fixed. Okay, resolved. You're just seeing this workflow that all kind of comes together. And whether they explicitly say, this has really helped us out, or it's just obvious from talking with them in terms of what they've been doing before, that has made it really easy to do what we're doing and to help making sure that we are solving these problems. And then it's just a means to the end to make sure that we're keeping kind of adding value in this space. It means that we're always getting the feedback from customers and kind of doing hiring and maybe some of the business things that I didn't necessarily get into engineering for, but just becomes so much of a big factor in what we're able to put out in problems to solve, and that really ends up being the big motivator.
Yeah, unless it's art, no one wants to build something that then doesn't get used or was the wrong thing to build.
Yep.
So it sounds like you both have done a ton of research and talked to a ton of different companies on their hardware design process. Can one or both of you maybe tag team your way through kind of what that looks like for a standard enterprise grade, hardware design company, and where are people running into trouble or pitfalls that are built into that process?
So typically what we see at companies is engineers kind of going through maybe like a 5 or 6 steps process, right? Where there's an initial specification settings, then there's a design component, then there's a validation of that design, then there's manufacturing, testing and feedback, and then you close the loop and you go through that again and again, right? In terms of the way engineers manage that, what we found is the design part happens mostly on ECAD tools, right? The rest of the steps, the manufacturing part, kind of the ordering, typically in a large company will happen through a PLM or whatever procurement systems you're using. The other steps is what ended up happening in no man's land. And we've seen a variety of approaches to that. What it comes down to, it's either companies outsourcing, kind of hiring a contract company to build them an in-house solution, or putting together a Google slide presentation template that they use as a starting point, right? So those are kind of the two status quos. And what the interesting thing that we notice is more and more frequently over time, it's increasing the number of teams that, because they weren't finding solutions for these problems, they gravitated towards software tools. So we talked to a lot of teams that were using GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or the software tools that were built for code, but given the kind of the options where that or Google slide presentation is like, well, let's give GitHub a try or GitLab a try. They're not getting the full functionality, but the teams gravitate towards this type of solutions. And part of it happens because the kind of hardware and software are becoming more and more interconnected, right? So hardware products are becoming software products as well, and hardware teams are becoming software teams as well. And sometimes they are very close together working counterparts. Sometimes it's the same person that's building both the hardware and the electronics and the firmware that's going to run on that. And they spend part of their time in this DevOps world and software, and part of their time in the rest. So they're kind of we see this kind of trend to try to match those two, and these teams gravitate towards software solutions. And that's a big part of how we decided to build Allspice, which is we didn't want to reinvent the workflow, but rather allow these teams that are gravitating towards the software practices to get the full experience. Just like, what can we build a platform where you get the same experience building software in GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, but for your electronic side? And teams really like that it is a workflow that they already know and they already understand. And it's becoming more and more common as these kind of two disciplines merge together over time. And we only think it's going to get stronger, right? I don't see, let's take an industry example is like automotive, right? I don't see cars becoming less autonomous over time, right? If it's kind of going the opposite way. So all of these hardware products are becoming more and more interconnected with software. And it's becoming really critical for these companies to enable these teams to work side by side. And we think those are the companies that are going to win in the future, are going to have an advantage, the ones that can figure out how to enable these two sides of the same coin to work together better.
Yeah, and just to double click on that for a second, like I was at Apple for 6 years. Like Apple is arguably like the most sophisticated consumer electronics company in the world. And like the dirty little secret is that like we were still printing out versions of the schematic and putting them around a large conference room table. And it was everybody would convene in the same conference room at the same time. And it was often bring your own highlighter. And we would like physically mark it up and then compare notes. And the fact that like communicating changes meant we weren't even allowed to use Google Slides because we were at Apple. Like we had to use Keynote. So we would take screenshots, paste them into Keynote, draw arrows pointing to things, and then send it out over email. And the fact that that was just so inefficient and just so like frustratingly manual. And then to Valentina's point, from a trend perspective, as projects and hardware products got more and more complex over time, all of a sudden it's not just like one person working on one printed circuit board and that's their project and they own it end to end. That is not the case. That was the case decades ago. That's not the case anymore. You've got multiple people working on different parts or different subsystems on the same PCB. And then the coordination problem is like magnified, and the coordination problem has only gotten worse. So like people have like flocked to using Git anyway, even though like GitHub, like as it exists today, just like doesn't cut it because it has no understanding of what the files are. So there's no intelligence there and interpretation or analysis. So that's, you know, the workflows are what I'm trying to say is like the workflows are bad even at the biggest of the big, like most reputable hardware companies in the industry.
Yeah, there's so much established in that space, but also lots of opportunity to meet some very real needs. At what point did you decide that a startup life was for you versus going into a more enterprise environment?
At least for me, it always just felt like a natural gravitation. I mean, I like to joke that I don't know what the heck else I would be doing that perfectly matches electrical engineering, software engineering, and business, all in one place. What I would say is development tools. You know, that in itself is a really, really exciting spot. So it was very natural to kind of gravitate to that. In fact, I was actually kind of workshopping personally some of these things at other companies in the past, and just saw that the scope could be so much bigger if, you know, I went and kind of knocked down the very bespoke areas for like this one that might work for this one company, but not for this others. And can we actually build a language around it, build a model around it, and build like what we're even looking at now, which is a marketplace around it, right? So having an open kind of like interface for people building their own automations and tools and plugins. So that's that just has so much more power when you start to not only, you know, break it out of an individual company, but even outside of like an individual, you know, file format or individual discipline even. I mean, we really try to bridge out to firmware engineers, mechanical engineers. We have project managers that come into Allspice Hub as well and like leave their feedback. So making sure we're breaking down these barriers wherever we can is I think what's really going to set this industry apart in the future.
I think for me, it came down to impact, which is I love hardware products in general. And I think there's just such an amazing wave of like new innovation coming in. And we have like all of these goals and we're trying to do some incredible things. It's like we're trying to build colonies in Mars. And I don't think we're going to get there with like Google Sheets and PDFs and screenshots, right? It's like we're trying to do this amazing like innovation and bringing it to life, and I think we need new infrastructure to help teams and enable teams to get there. And I didn't think that we were going to get there with incremental improvements. We need like a new foundational way of building products and getting them to market and innovating around that space. So you see how like software has changed like our digital lives like incredibly much in the past few years. It's like I think my dream will be to like see the same level of innovation and improvement on our physical lives, right? In the physical world.
What is the current state of Allspice today? And what maybe are you most proud of as a subset of what you offer today?
Yeah, so at a high level, Allspice is a collaboration platform for hardware, electrical, electronics engineers that it's based on Git workflows and software principles. And think of what, again, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket do for software, but for electronics instead of code. So for printed circuit boards, for schematics, for building materials. And what we do today is give a home base to these teams where they can manage their revision control, where they can run their design reviews, where they can track the issues that they have with their teammates, and they can build end-to-end from day one till release to manufacturing and PLM systems, a workflow around that. What I am the most proud of, I will say one of our most popular features on the platform is the ability of running digital asynchronous design reviews. So typically a design review, as we were talking earlier, people like schedule 3 weeks in advance and get everyone in their room. But what we do in Allspice is basically with one click enabling teams to automatically generate this review packages as red lines. We call them visual divs. So that tells you exactly what in your design has changed, what are like the differences between the last version and the newest version, all the way to like if you change things that even are invisible, like a net name or a manufacturer part number or something like that, and enabling people to kind of go in, provide their feedback, collaborate, and run that process. And what we see is going from one big review at the end of a cycle that takes too much time, and when you find out things that maybe that was something that you did on like day 3 and like you waited a month to find out that it's something that you need to change. And we see this shift in the way the teams operate, where they go from one mega review at the end to smaller discrete chunks throughout the process, and breaking that review into small mini sessions or mini peer feedback sessions, like maybe once a week or maybe like 2 or 3 times a week, and bringing a lot of those discoveries and learnings a lot earlier in the process for these teams, which allows them to move just so much faster.
Yeah, it's much better to have a few small surprises than one big surprise right at the end. That's for sure.
It's much better to know it on like when you spend 3 days on that design and not 3 months. And It's very hard to unwind some of these decisions, and they get very entrenched. So the earlier we can give this information to engineers, and we can help them identify the gaps, or maybe that everything is going well, but like how to optimize it, how to improve, and bringing the rest of the stakeholders as well. One of the things that I'm most proud of Allspice is that we hear that how we can lower the barrier for collaboration, not just between electrical engineers themselves, but also with the rest of the teams, right? We see project managers, we see mechanical engineers, we see firmware engineers, and then having visibility and ability to participate in the process that used to be a black box, and you just get everything tossed over the wall through a PDF attachment or an email thread every so often. Giving them the option to kind of come and be part of the process, it just creates like so much better collaboration and communication at these companies.
Kyle, is there any specific capability or part of Allspice that you've worked on that you're especially proud of, or that maybe was especially difficult for you and the team?
Yeah, I would say one area that we always come back to is having this interesting, design problem of taking the software concepts and applying them to hardware in ways that are intuitive for hardware engineers and applicable for hardware engineers. A lot of times there's visual elements of that. It's certainly something that we come back to. And I think presents something that we can come back to again and again as far as our kind of value add to the industry. Another area that I'm particularly excited and proud of is starting to build in some of the automation. I mean, in a lot of ways, like what we've built now is this framework for really connecting together all these systems. First, as Valentina mentioned, manually, as far as letting people kind of come in and see and participate and comment and feedback, but then also now starting to build some of these outputs. So generating bill of materials and documents and running test files, all of this stuff we're kind of building up this infrastructure for. So I would say that's the thing I'm most excited about.
Chrissy, at this point in a company's development stage, you've chosen to invest. What sort of role does a VC firm play, and what sort of role do you play as maybe an advisor for Allspice?
There's no like one size fits all answer to that question. I think every investor, every VC, every firm, every person, even within the same firm, operates a little bit differently. It has their own style. At Root Ventures, we tend to go as early as possible. So we invest in like pre-seed and seed stage companies. We write $1 to $3 million checks, and it's really, at the company formation stage, right? Like it's like, you know, Valentina and Kyle, it's a couple people like coming right out of school or you know, that they've been just left their last big company job. And that's typically where we come in and where we like to operate. And at that stage, we do a little bit of everything. Like they have a very lean, very scrappy team. And like I have spent a tremendous amount of time helping companies recruit and close individual contributors and exec, you know, candidates and, you know, move people through a recruiting pipeline. I help out a lot when it comes to fundraising, because the truth is, as VCs, we see a lot more fundraising pitches than the entrepreneurs and the founders themselves do. So it's, I feel like that's one area where we can add a lot of value and just like helping them construct the right narrative and make sure that the story that they're telling is going to be attractive to potential downstream investors that they're pitching. We spend a lot of time talking about strategy. I mean, every board meeting that Valentina has had, we've gotten really deep into some big strategic questions around, you know, both what we want to do on the product side and on the go-to-market. And then, like, to be completely honest with you, like this space in particular, because where I have a lot of friends and network and experience, just like making customer introductions and reviewing marketing materials and everything. Like there's no job above or below us. And at Root specifically, we like to take a really active role, and especially in the early days when the team is small and the founders are doing everything, and we will pinch hit wherever is needed at the time.
As we get near the end of each episode, we like to do a lightning round, ask some quick questions. First one's for you, Valentina. Any tips for folks in technical roles that might want to explore CEO positions down the road?
There's a lot of kind of structural pieces and capital and introductions, and there's also the human element. I will say entrepreneurship is a roller coaster. The highs are high and the lows are low, and it's a lifestyle choice as much as it is a career choice. So the way I thought about it when I was in school was Kyle and I spent our summer between first and second year working on Allspice. And for me, it was both testing the idea, but also testing, is this the type of job that I like? So if there's a way that you can MVP trying out the like lifestyle, which is at the beginning is very lonely. Like there's long periods of time where it was just Kyle and I, and sometimes we work remotely and we were in different states and it was just me for a long time, and it requires a lot of structure and like self-motivation, and you need to be very, very passionate about the space that you're in and the problem you're solving, because there's no manager to kind of move forward, and there's no one to really, the other thing that investors are helpful is I don't really have a manager to go to when things go wrong, and I don't have anyone to hide behind when things are scary or like when I don't know what to do, and kind of surrounding yourself with people that kind of fill the blanks for what you're less experienced in. I think for me, the most important things were, is this a lifestyle that you want? And is this it's something that you can commit to for the long term? Entrepreneurship is it's a career choice long term. It's like this, can you do this for the next 10 years? And then also, who are the people that you want to have in your corner when things get hard? Because they will get hard. And it's a matter of like, you need a support system that's going to kind of help you navigate those questions, because there's just so many unknowns that when I was getting started, I didn't know that I was going to have these problems. I was already kind of thinking about the things that I need to fix, and then 100 other problems came up like after the fact that as we go through building our company. So kind of the most important one is being passionate about the space, enjoying the lifestyle, and then identifying who are the people that can be great partners for you along the way.
Chrissy, I don't think we've ever had anyone from a VC firm before on the podcast, so it's been interesting to get your perspective. Do you have any tips for folks that are trying to get a project or a company funded?
Yeah, I'd just say, like, there's this common misconception that in order to approach VCs, you need to have a fully polished pitch deck, you need to have a financial model and forecasts and projections, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd say that, like, that is a myth. And like the reality of the situation is, when you've got early stage investors like Root Ventures, we want you to come to us with half-baked ideas, because the truth is, we love pitches that are more brainstorming sessions than presentations. Like, we love catching founders when they're still kind of early in the ideation phase and maybe have a few different things that they might want to work on, or a few different ideas of problems that they want to solve within a specific industry, And we can, tell them, point out the pitfalls and point out the other companies we've seen in the space and like point out the challenges and things that we've observed. And we can work together to kind of like morph the product and company trajectory. So I'd just say, like, don't feel like you have to have it fully buttoned up and everything has to be polished and perfect. Come to us early and let us ideate with you. Like, let us brainstorm with you, because that is far more exciting to me as an early stage investor than somebody getting up with a PowerPoint and just reading it out.
I do have an advice for pitching VCs from a founder perspective. What I've learned by building Allspice is that finding investors and pitching, it's less about convincing anyone and more about finding the people that already believe in the version of the world that you're trying to build.
Full stop. Yeah, that's both encouraging and terrifying at the same time, I think.
Yeah, it's very hard. I feel like people are like, it's very hard to convince investors that I think your idea is good, and it gets a little bit more defensive, and it's hard to sell like a world that doesn't really exist yet, right? Like in the early stages, you don't have a product, you don't have a team, sometimes you don't even have a prototype. So it's going to be very, very difficult to convince someone that doesn't believe in it that you're right and that the way that you see the world is how it's going to be. What we've found, like, it's in the partners that we've found that have been the best for us are those that they see the world going in the same direction that we see it going. And it's more like a discovery process of like finding who those people are rather than trying to turn other people into who you want them to be a partner for you.
If you couldn't do Allspice and this wasn't the problem you tackled, are there any problems you considered that you still think, maybe had some viability?
I will say, even to flip the script a little bit, there are a lot of areas where hardware engineers do a much better job than software engineers at collaborating. And one I'll even plug out there is around documentation. Documentation in hardware is like a first-class citizen. Yeah. Design verification testing, bring up documentation, all of that. It's very manual, and I think we can do a better job of automating it. I think software does a good job of embedding a lot of this stuff, but actually kind of generating some of this documentation things to help. And there's also test data. Test data in hardware is a similar story. It's a first-class citizen in a lot of ways, in that I know when we send something for internal testing, we're going to have a whole trove of data to kind of collect out of things. I don't think that we, for the design process in software, really have tools that do what we need there. In terms of, we're trying to get information on each version of the design as far as how efficient is maybe some function or something like that. There's not really set ways to actually collect and organize some of that data. So I think that's one place where software engineers can start to learn from hardware. Maybe Allspice can start working for the software engineers too.
Can I answer that question too?
Please.
Like, if I were to start a company or more likely invest in a company right now, the thing that I've spent a lot of time on over just like the last 6 months is like digging into the like biotech space. And I have quickly come to realize that like I thought tooling and infrastructure and workflows in electrical engineering were bad. Well, guess what? It's like even worse in a lot of cases when you get into biotech. So in terms of like opportunities for like Allspice 2.0, I would love to invest in or work with the founders that are like building the next like biotech infrastructure company.
Allspice for biotech.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you name that company? Sorry.
Biospice.
Biospice. The spice of life. There it is. I love watching movies with other engineers because we just pick apart everything. Are there any cases of movies or books in pop culture that really get it right in your mind in the world of engineering, or any that really get it wrong?
Yeah, I do read a lot of sci-fi, and I mean, obviously, a lot of the genre and books I read are pretty famous for getting things more right than not. I did read Snow Crash recently, which Neil Stephenson, obviously famous for coining the term metaverse. And it was interesting because that book was written in the early 90s. And that one was great for how many things he absolutely nailed in the book in terms of, people buying real estate in VR. And look at 2 years ago, we have Meta real estate, right? And then, but then on the flip side, I remember there's one particular scene where somebody like rips a fax out of the fax machine in the same day and age. I'm like, well, you missed that one.
Yeah.
So.
What's a good place to go to learn more about revision control for hardware and maybe some best practices across the industry for this?
If you want to learn more, obviously we can talk about our product, but also we love creating content for this community. Like regardless if you use Allspice or not, one of the things we put together is an ebook called Using Git for Hardware, right? So if you want to learn like the principles, like what applies, what it doesn't apply, and like bring it to your workflow and bring it to your company, it's like you don't have to use our product necessarily, and you can learn some of the tidbits and the practices that may make your workflow better. When you're talking about like what are some suggestions, it's like we have an incredible like repertoire of resources that can help teams like think about how they structure their day-to-day work. And we have an ebook, we have webinars where we talk about Git crash courses and using Git principles and kind of managing all the way from issues to releases, and working with contract manufacturers and working with external vendors, collaborating with internal counterparts. So I will say if you want to learn more, just go check out some of the resources that may help, like may make a difference for your day-to-day job.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all three of you for being here today. If you, the listener, are interested in learning more, definitely go check out that ebook. It's like 80 pages, and I've been enjoying working through it. Also, if you want to chuckle, go check out Root Ventures' webpage at root.vc. This is not an exaggeration. It's maybe my favorite website of all time. It's fantastic, root.vc. Visit it from a computer, not your phone. But I digress. Let's get back on track. If you enjoy this podcast, come check us out on the Moore's Lobby social pages and subscribe in your favorite podcast app. And as always, if you tag someone on social media that you think will like this podcast, we'll send some swag your way. I'm your host, Daniel Bogdanov. Thank you for listening, and may your merges be conflict-free. I'll catch you next time.